Hey y'all, I'm Shauna. Welcome in or welcome back to the channel and welcome to another day of Vlogmas. It is finally December 1st in my Vlogmas filming time, and I honestly, I cannot believe how fast 2024 went. It's not over yet, but it's blowing my mind. It's December, and we're just gonna yap for just a second before we get into the video. So if you want to just get into the content, I'll have a chapter that will link to you when we start the video. Today, I finally pulled out Santa comes with a hat, so you could keep your little drink warm, and it's on the counter because I want to drink my drink. It's not gonna sit on my desk. I just love it so much. And I also finished my pumpkin spice flavored coffee 2 days ago, on November 29th. So I was also, my partner, he bought me the peppermint mocha flavor at the perfect time, so I get to have it today. Had it yesterday too, not gonna lie. I also opened the first day of my advent calendar this morning, just a chocolate one, so I could have with my coffee. Got a little Lindt snowball, my favorite. Let me know if you have any traditions that you do on specific days of holiday time. Okay, onto the video. Today we are talking about contentment, and I used to talk about contentment all the time on my channel, most especially in 2022, because I believe very firmly to this day that contentment helps so much with stopping shopping, makes that easier, but also just makes for a more joyful life. I had a recent experience that made me rethink about contentment, kind of maybe as well my approach to contentment, and also how I'm thinking about certain areas of my life in 2024. We're going to focus on contentment with our stuff today, but that doesn't mean that contentment doesn't apply to other areas. It most certainly does. I want to talk first about the difference between happiness and contentment so we can all be on the same page about these things. Let's start with happiness first. Happiness is an emotion, and it is an emotion that we experience largely when we experience pleasure. For me, this would be eating a great pizza, or a slice of pizza, or drinking my morning coffee. I just get so much freaking pleasure. It's quite the dopamine hit to drink my first cup of coffee. Not just because it's coffee and there's caffeine hitting you. I friggin' love coffee. So it's just one of my favorite parts of my day, brings me a lot of pleasure. The thing about happiness is that it largely comes from external factors, so things outside of ourselves. We experience happiness when we do something, see something, engage with something that brings us desire or pleasure, or something that we view as desirable or pleasurable. And happiness can happen on accident, or I guess I should say without intention. You could do something on a whim. You could decide to randomly go out for dinner with a friend and have the best time. You might not have intended to have a good time. You might not have intended even to eat at that specific restaurant because you liked it, or go out that day. It just could have happened. And that's the thing about happiness, is that it can happen with intention, but it doesn't require it. Because happiness is an emotion and it's not a state of being, it is fleeting, so it won't last. This is what makes the pursuit of happiness so precarious, in my own opinion. If we are pursuing happiness and not something like contentment, we can find ourselves on a bit of a hamster wheel. Happiness is a high, which means there's a low. That doesn't necessarily mean sadness, or that you're feeling sad or down. It's just coming down from the high means that you are lower than you were previously. And it's that feeling that can lead us to searching for more happiness or more hits of that. Any of this may be sounding familiar with shopping, perhaps. The pursuit of happiness, even if it's well-intentioned, can become a bit like a drug, because the feeling of being happy can be quite the high that we're just constantly looking for the next hit. And a lot of drugs, what can happen with happiness is the more you use it, the higher your tolerance. You build a tolerance, and then you need heavier and heavier doses to feel happy, or as happy as you once were at the beginning. One of the things that this happens with me with personally is a vacation or time off, even if it's just one day. We're not going anywhere fancy. I'm going on a day trip somewhere. When I come back, I quite often feel like I'm experiencing sadness, when in reality it tends to just be the coming down from that high of having a really good trip and spending time with my partner. If we're searching for happiness, whether that is more on an instinctual level or deliberate and intentional, what we're often doing is seeking pleasure. And so our eyes can constantly, like if we're searching for happiness, our eyes can constantly be on the newest thing or things that aren't currently in our lives, things we don't have. What will give me pleasure today? Maybe it's the new bagel from Starbucks, or maybe it's the new sticker sheet, or maybe it's the new restaurant, or maybe it's this. It often involves stuff, to be honest, but not always. I'm sure you can think of fun, pleasurable things that aren't things you buy. So we're constantly looking for things we don't have or things that are outside of ourselves and out of our lives in order to get that next hit. And we're so caught up in looking for that next dose of happiness that we ignore the things that are in our own lives. That is one of my biggest problems with like coveting happiness for myself personally. And this is not the life that I want to live. It's not as though happiness serves no function or pleasure serves no function in our lives. No, ma'am. Happiness is an enjoyable emotion to experience, and I think it can be an important metric in our lives. It's not something like we don't need to go and be stoics here. Just as one example, when it comes to hobbies, your pleasure, happiness, or enjoyment of it can serve as an important metric as to whether you want to maintain that thing long term. Like if you're just kind of starting out, getting in touch with your pleasure or your happiness can really be a guiding force in helping you to determine if it's something that you continue. It also can be a part of why you like your current hobbies. I like stickers. They give me pleasure. I like journaling and running, and one of the main reasons why I love running is I get the biggest freaking dopamine hit. I have so much freaking pleasure reading. Reading kind of feels self-serving to me. Like I read because it's fun. I read because it's pleasurable, and that's totally fine. Pleasure isn't evil or something that has no place in our lives. I just think it's more of a time and place. Contentment, on the other hand, isn't an emotion. It's more of a state of being. And what is really important about contentment is that it can be sustained. You can sustain it for days, months, or years where you generally can't do that with happiness. Happiness is far more fleeting. And with contentment, what I'm talking about here is not that's good enough or that'll do or settling for something. Sometimes culturally or socially, people talk about like you're content with something as kind of meaning more about settling, which is not what I'm talking about here. You're satisfied with something. You're pleased with something. You've accepted something. I'm not talking about perfection either. What I am talking about is being satisfied with who you are, what you have, and where you are in life. This has been my mantra for 2 years, is satisfaction with who I am, where I am, and what I have in life. In my opinion, it's about embracing yourself as you are. You are good enough. You are worthy enough as you are and who you are. If you do want to change something about yourself, it doesn't come out of a place of self-hatred or disliking of yourself, but out of a place of love. This is like a hard one that I've had to learn over the years, where I thought that like I was trying to better myself through change, but really I just didn't like myself, and I was trying to create change because I didn't feel good enough. In my opinion, hating yourself to change is not going to lead to self-acceptance. If that worked, I would be happy by now. I would be satisfied or content, perhaps more appropriately, the more appropriate word. I do have a video from 2022 called What's the Difference Between Happiness and Contentment? If you want to hear more about this kind of stuff and why I don't think contentment is settling, more of that is in that video. And that is a video I do actually watch probably at least once a year. I think I've watched it 5 or 6 times, so more than once a year, since I first published it in 2022. In my opinion, contentment is both a habit and a choice. It's extremely difficult to come to a place of self-satisfaction or self-acceptance without a choice, without choosing that, or I should say without being intentional about it. So how does all of this relate to stuff? In my opinion, many of us are used to chasing happiness instead of contentment. Not only because I think culturally people tend to talk about happiness in the realm of contentment. And I don't want to get too hung up on words here, because if you're saying happiness but meaning contentment, I'm not trying to pick a bone with you. But where I think there could be the problem is if you are thinking about happiness like contentment, like you're maybe thinking that it's more like contentment, but you are doing the things of chasing happiness and pleasure, but thinking it will give you the results of contentment is more what I mean. That could be like part of the problem. And I think that was something that happened with me, is I thought that I could experience the long-lasting results of contentment with happiness. And I think this plays a big role into why people shop. Not every time and not every person, let's be clear, but I think that it has or can have an impact. I know this was absolutely true for me. And one of the things that, or one of the reasons why I found pleasure or shopping so pleasurable was because it fixed my boredom. I didn't know how to appreciate my things once they weren't new anymore. And so I would go and buy new things. Being content with what we have and getting good at appreciating our stuff helps us to kind of solve these boredom problems and going to buying new things when we're bored. I think one of the reasons why shopping is pleasurable is the novel experience. The novelty, I should say, I think helps bring us pleasure. Wearing something that's new, using something that's new, and having maybe a conflation or like an attachment or a really strong association between novelty and pleasure. You experience your happiness through novelty. I think happiness is also sold to us a lot in marketing, that you could use this specific product and become happier, or it could be implied in advertising. Contentment doesn't sell. Appreciating yourself doesn't sell. I think it can be antithetical to capitalism and to consumerism. And so if we're constantly pitched happiness, we can constantly be looking for new forms of happiness or new ways to experience novelty even. We see people chasing pleasure on social media. We've been trained and encouraged to use pleasure as a metric for shopping and our lives because it gets us to buy more looking for pleasure. I think contentment is a wonderful form of resistance to consumerism and overconsumption. And this is why I think contentment is so important to focus on, at least in a small respect. And this is part of why I think habits are crucial to helping us change how we shop, because we can just get stuck in habit loops. We buy something, let's say a top, we feel great doing it. We then wear the top, which we love, and we're getting a novel experience with the new top. We then feel bored and then recall, or our brain does it for us, we felt great last time we bought a top. So we go out shopping and buy a new thing. We get the pleasure, we wear it and have the pleasure. And we know with habit loops, we don't actually need the reward to happen. You do in like the first couple times, but eventually your brain makes the connection and fills in the loop without the reward. And we can come to anticipate the reward without it actually ever being present, or even if that thing is no longer rewarding, and even if it brings us negative consequences, we can still anticipate the reward and it can still motivate the loop. Again, this is not every case of shopping, every person. This is just like a thing that can happen. Contentment is an active choice, at least at the beginning, and it's a skill that we can cultivate and strengthen. I think it's maybe akin to building muscles, where you can work out for a few weeks and you can build up, I don't know, strong core muscles, or you can lift more weights, more bench presses or chest presses. And then you might stop for a few weeks, go back to the gym and realize you can't lift the same amount of weights anymore. But the habits and knowledge are there for when you do decide to go back. Even if you're sick for a couple of weeks, contentment with our stuff can be hard when we're constantly being bombarded with messages about happiness, novelty, and newness. But I think over time, we can strengthen this skill and develop habits of contentment. We can focus so much on the new stuff and the pleasure of it all that we lose sight of things. We can lose sight of what we already have, all of the beautiful stuff that we already own, all of the stuff that we have that fulfills purposes and made us happy at one point. We can lose sight of our finances or our future goals. The seeking of newness and pleasure can be such an effective distraction because of how good it feels. And we can't notice what we have if we're not even thinking about it. This is why, in part, I find like when I'm shopping for stuff, looking at my cart in front of the stuff I already have, because quite often I'm detached from my current collection, my current iteration of stuff, that when I look at the cart in front of my things, I am bridging that connection and I'm able to see, oh yes, I already have all of these things that I might not be even thinking of or even wanting to consider. And this newness, this novelty, and appreciating what we have, I think makes shopping a gray area, or there can be gray areas of shopping, because we often hear people say that we should love our clothes. And I'm just saying clothes here because that's what's coming to mind. And that's like one of the examples that I'm thinking about, but it could be anything. It could be makeup or furniture or teas or, knitting needles or yarn. Whatever it is your thing, you can insert that here. People talk about that we should be happy with our stuff, that we should like our stuff, and if you don't like it, then just declutter it, or like you should find pleasure in your stuff. All of that is true, and if like you really hate something, I'm not suggesting to keep it, but if we overemphasize the pleasure in our stuff, that can come to overpower some of the other factors, and that can sometimes matter more in more circumstances than appreciating and using our stuff. I was talking with a friend recently about shopping habits, and one of the things that I had noticed recently was that I found it easier to stop shopping for makeup than for clothes. Although I have cut back significantly on how much I buy in both categories and also how I think about both things, I have found not shopping for clothes more effortful. One of the realizations that really was made clear to me was that clothes are much more permanent than makeup. Makeup you can use and finish, and I also, my mind, think about it as a consumable, or at least this is how I thought about it back in the day. I mean, it is a consumable, but when I was shopping a lot for makeup, one thing I would tell myself or had in mind when buying stuff was that like this would be gone eventually. Like I could buy whatever I wanted because there was an expiration date, so it would go out of my collection eventually. Not quite the way I want to think about it now. It will expire at some point. Clothes don't expire. Even shitty fast fashion clothes can last a long time. I have fast fashion sweaters that I bought in the mid 2010s that I still own. There are no holes, there are no rips, there are no tears. They're in pretty great condition. Clothes are not consumables, and clothes usually don't have a shelf life. If you're somebody who loves buying things like I was, this was not a good thing. I found that what I was doing was turning clothes into consumables. And the way that I thought about clothes was like a consumable, and I would put shelf lives onto my clothes. I turned clothes into something that were okay to discard. I gave my clothes shelf lives where, oh, it had a ripped knee, toss it. Something is not fashionable anymore. Bye. Keeping something for years is more difficult to do when you think about clothes as a shelf life, or you assume a shelf life when you buy them, or you assume that you will declutter them down the road. Now, I didn't have that assumption baked in, and I wasn't something that I was consciously thinking about when I was purchasing clothes. It was more like an ingrained kind of like subconscious thought, because this was my usual behavior. Shopping with a shelf life in mind can be buying a t-shirt for a costume, or simply buying something just because you like it and not thinking about other factors. Buying trends. One of the best ways to find contentment with your stuff, or make contentment with your stuff easier, is to think about longevity at the time of purchase. We're going to talk about more things later that don't involve the time of purchase, but that is the best way to like be able to use your clothes long term. One of the reasons why I talk about cost per wear and owning stuff for years, which I know not everybody in the community likes, and I do get pushback on that quite often, where people say like, this is setting yourself up for failure. If it doesn't work for you, don't do it. That's totally fine. For me, it works because I never thought about the longevity of my clothes until like 2 to 3 years ago. And I was just buying stuff because I liked it or because I thought it was cute. And then I would find myself not liking things, not wanting to wear them, and after a year or two. And so if I'm thinking about just even, could I own it in 1 year's time or 5 years time? Do I think I could like this 5 years down the road? That stops a lot of the buying trendy stuff. And then if there are things that are more trendy, then I can have a more honest like conversation with myself about whether this is right for me or if I want to purchase it anyway. But if I'm thinking about long term, then I can make sure that like 80% of my clothes I would want to wear 3, 5, 10 years down the line. When I was an overconsumer, not only did I not factor in long term, but I did not want to, because that would mean I would buy less stuff. And then also I would own it for longer, which I didn't want to own clothes for that long because it meant that I couldn't buy more clothes. It's kind of messed up logic now that I think about it, and now that I'm honestly like being honest with myself about how I used to think about things. I was so caught up in the buy and declutter cycle. I truly treated my clothes like disposable wipes or something like that. And thinking about longevity and factoring that in, I wasn't even interested in doing it because then I couldn't buy more stuff. And when I was thinking about what made makeup easier to stop shopping and clothes more difficult to stop shopping, yes, there was that consumable aspect to it. But when I really thought about it, I also noticed that I had much stronger contentment skills with makeup than with clothes, and skills that I practiced like every day that were routine behaviors that were habitual, things that are now gut instincts, things that I don't have to think too much about except in, rarer circumstances. Every now and then I have to be more intentional about, experiencing contentment with my makeup to de-influence myself. But I overall have pretty good contentment skills with makeup that I don't have as strong a skill set with that I use regularly with clothes. And part of that contentment is going to, I think, probably be a little bit easier with makeup because there is that consumable factor. So even if I stop buying stuff, which I have largely, like I don't buy eyeshadow palettes or lipsticks or blushes. I haven't purchased any of those things myself in at least 2 years. Besides like a lip gloss, I think a couple of lip glosses. That would be like the lip products that I've used, or like a lip balm like that. So because my makeup rotates naturally, like you finish mascara, you finish powders, and you finish bronzers, there is that rotating aspect that doesn't exist with clothes. And so I think that for me anyway, there would be more of an intentionality factor that is required with clothes if I really do want to keep them for years. Some things will always be easier for me, like a t-shirt. It's going to be something on a fundamental level for me to keep in love for years because that's an item I wear all the time. I have quite strong love for it. Some items are just going to be a little bit more difficult. And ultimately, my wardrobe is not comprised of white and black t-shirts. My wardrobe is comprised of things like this, things that I've already owned or that I already own. And I can say all I want about factoring in, thinking about things at the time of purchase, I still own a whole bunch of clothes. And what I found is when I enjoy my clothes, it makes them much easier to wear and own long term. And when I thought about this, it made this kind of exciting because I like to think about my life through the lens of skill or habits. These are things we can cultivate. We can get better at contentment, or even if it's something contentment unrelated, drawing. A lot of us can get better at doodling. And getting better at doodling is not the same as becoming a world-renowned artist or selling art online. We can get better at a lot of things. Getting better at cultivating skill, I'm thinking about maybe through the lens of competency. We can develop competency without being experts. And we don't need to be experts in a lot of areas. We need to be competent. And developing skills and habits is much more exciting to me. And so I can develop contentment skills specifically tailored to my wardrobe. And this is a much more interesting way at framing my wardrobe than don't buy stuff. Don't buy stuff. This was entirely how I framed my contentment year, where I wanted to stop asking myself, how can I stop buying things? And I wanted to start asking myself, how can I start appreciating things? And there are certain areas where it's been easier and I've developed like specific skills and habits. Others, I just think need a little bit more of an eye on them on a regular basis, which is totally fine. And for me, clothes is one of those areas. And it's why people say love things last. There's a whole book that's called Why Love Clothes Last. I think it's Why Love Clothes Last. Think about your life. Your favorite stuff is typically the easiest stuff for us to use. These are items you want to keep and cherish or use or wear all the time. So if I want to keep a wardrobe that lasts and also that I love, I need to find ways to appreciate my stuff, find contentment with my stuff. That's why we're here. So a question that I ask myself and I encourage you to ask yourself, what does contentment with my stuff look like? Or if you have a particular area in mind, like in my case, clothes, what does contentment with my clothes look like? And how do I appreciate my things? How do I appreciate my clothes, my planners, etc.? So I'm going to give a couple of examples for clothes. And then after that, I'm going to talk about more generally why contentment is more important than ever. One of my favorites is a closet playtime with a specific item, like my red sweater, or just having a playtime. Sometimes I lean on one or the other. I really like making mini capsules or creating style challenges, recreating outfits based on songs or movies or books, vibes, colors. There are so many style challenges that I've done over the years, and I know there's so many more that I could do, but I find if I am looking for novelty, that could be a way to do it. If I'm feeling bored with some of my clothes, I think that just packing them away, just having them out of sight somewhere you don't look at all that regularly. I've left this, I didn't break out this sweater, I don't think at all last year. I think I had a different one, or maybe I pulled it out initially for a few weeks and was like, no. And I had in the back of my mind, maybe I'll declutter it. But after having it away for a year, this is like one of my favorite sweaters right now. I also find reorganizing my closet or taking care of my clothes, like defuzzing sweaters, to be really great at helping me appreciate my stuff. Showing love for it and taking care of it is always a reminder to me. And lastly, recreating outfits. Sometimes this doesn't work. This is not for every circumstance. For almost any circumstance for me, doing a wardrobe playtime will do something. Recreating outfits is not always going to do it, because sometimes that's when I feel like, oh, I don't have this thing, I need this thing, or I want this thing. More like it, I'll talk to myself. Even now, sometimes, oh, I need this thing. No, ma'am, you want it. It's not a need. So those are just a few clothing examples. What are some examples from you that help you appreciate your stuff, whether that's clothes or something else? Lastly, or the last segment I want to talk about, is why contentment is more important than ever. And I have some personal reasons and also some more general reasons. For me personally, I have goals like leading a more sustainable life and consuming less. Part of sustainability, in my opinion, is using what we have. Owning less things is part of that. So using what I have for longer or making it work for longer is equally a part of that. My finances matter a lot to me, and buying new clothes regularly is not a healthy financial habit. I also have savings goals, and the more stuff I buy, the less I'm saving. One of the things as well that is personal to me that you might also be able to relate to is that I want to think about my stuff less. And I've had this as a goal for a few years, and it's just become increasingly important to me, each and every year. I want my stuff and shopping, I don't want that to take up a lot of mental space. I don't want it to take up a lot of energy, time, or money. I want to get to a place where I don't think about my clothes all that much, except for when I get dressed. Contentment goes such a long way with that. I personally find myself happier when I'm thinking about stuff and shopping less. And so even in just the name of day-to-day contentment or happiness, that is important to me. If I want to buy less stuff, as I was just mentioning about, I need to own what I have for longer. And I've personally found that the better the attitude I have about something, the more enjoyable the experience is. Buying less stuff is not a punishment. I generally don't feel that way anymore. I did at the beginning of my no-buy, I was punishing myself, and I did retain some of those thoughts for a long time. There's content out there or other circumstances or stuff that threatens my own contentment with my stuff. And you probably have examples too. There can be people that encourage us to shop and spend money, or when we watch content that overvalues aesthetics, or consuming marketing or content that stirs up insecurity. When I focus on contentment, I find it easier to be able to pinpoint what's the noise out there, what are the things that are distracting me or making it more difficult to appreciate my stuff. But I'm not always great at that. And so I think it is really important to be able to pinpoint what is the content, who are the people, what are the circumstances that threaten our own contentment or make us feel less content or makes us feel like what we have isn't good enough. I also want to show people that using what you have is and can be an enjoyable experience. To circle back to sustainability, yes, we are in a climate crisis. And I think some people view this as it's a critical necessity to stop buying stuff. And this message alone should be enough to get us to stop buying things. I kind of feel that maybe assumption is similar to minimalism, that just decluttering your stuff is going to lead you to shopping differently or thinking about your stuff differently, which isn't always the case. Like, you can know on a fundamental level that there is a climate crisis, but this alone doesn't stop people from shopping. This alone didn't stop me from shopping in the past. If we do hold this lens specifically with sustainability, I think we could think about, not buying stuff as something we have to do, something that you just grit your teeth and bear it. No matter what you think or feel about it, you just have to do it. We can stop shopping or shop less without it having to be a punishment, without it having to be something that freaking sucks. It can be an enjoyable experience. And as I mentioned, that shopping less or not shopping at all can be a form of resistance, but using what we have does not have to be an undesirable experience. And I think it should be fun. And it doesn't mean that we're not doing it right because we're having fun. Kind of all we can really ask of ourselves is our best, because you can't do any better than your best. I hope that this video gave you some things to consider. And our climate totally does matter. Let's be clear. But also our personal circumstances matter too. Finding contentment with what we have can be great for sustainability reasons, but also financial reasons or mental clarity and peace and things like that I think can matter so much as well on a day-to-day level. So that's the video today. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you again around here soon for another day of Vlogmas. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.